Trevor Caldwell was 36 years old and sitting in his attorney's office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March when he realized his wife of 9 years had orchestrated the perfect heist. She hadn't stolen from a bank or committed fraud in any traditional sense. No, what Simone Caldwell had done was far more calculated, far more devastating. She had systematically dismantled their marriage, drained their accounts, and positioned herself to walk away with nearly everything they'd built together. All because of one affair that had started 18 months ago with a personal trainer named Kyle Donovan at an upscale gym in downtown Seattle. Trevor worked as a software engineer at Microsoft, pulling in approximately $178,000 annually, not including stock options that had vested over his 7 years with the company. Simone had been a real estate agent when they met, making decent commissions in Seattle's booming housing market, around $85,000 in her best years. But 3 years into their marriage, she'd convinced Trevor that she wanted to start her own boutique marketing agency. She needed seed capital, she'd said. About $120,000 to get it off the ground. Trevor had believed in her, had taken out a home equity line of credit on their Ballard neighborhood house, the one they'd purchased for $487,000 in 2018, and was now worth close to $820,000. The marketing agency had never materialized. Instead, Simone had used portions of that money for what she called networking events, luxury client dinners that Trevor was never invited to, designer clothes that she claimed were necessary for maintaining her professional image. Louboutin heels at $895 a pair, Gucci handbags averaging $2,300 each, a wardrobe that expanded exponentially while her supposed business remained mysteriously invisible. Trevor had noticed the changes, of course. The way Simone started working out obsessively, leaving the house at 5:30 a.m. for CrossFit sessions at Peak Performance Gym. How she'd password protect her phone and laptop. How she'd become emotionally distant, barely making eye contact during the dinners they still occasionally shared. How their bedroom had transformed from a place of intimacy to just a room where two strangers slept on opposite sides of a king-size mattress. The discovery came on a Saturday morning in November. Trevor had been searching for his old college sweatshirt and had checked the storage ottoman in their bedroom. Beneath some folded blankets, he'd found a burner phone, one of those cheap prepaid flip phones you could buy at any drugstore for $29.99. The text messages on it told him everything he needed to know. Kyle, can't wait to see you at the condo tomorrow. Bring that red thing I like. Simone, already packed. Told T I have a client retreat in Spokane all weekend. Kyle, how much longer until you're free? This sneaking around is getting old. Simone, lawyer says file in March. Wait till I secure the money transfers. Then I'm all yours, baby. Trevor had stood in that bedroom, phone trembling in his hands, feeling like the floor was falling away beneath him. 9 years of marriage. 9 years of trust, of building a life together, of supporting her dreams. And she'd been planning her exit strategy like it was just another business transaction. He hadn't confronted her immediately. That was the part Trevor would later credit with saving his financial life. Instead of emotional explosion, he'd chosen strategic silence. He'd carefully photographed every message on that burner phone. Then he'd placed it exactly where he'd found it, beneath those folded blankets, and had driven straight to the law offices of Chen and Associates downtown. The attorney he met with, a sharp woman in her 50s named Victoria Chen, had listened to his story with the kind of practiced calm that suggested she'd heard variations of it 1,000 times before. She'd examined the photographs of the text messages on Trevor's phone and had asked him one critical question. Did you have a prenuptial agreement? Yes, Trevor had said. Simone insisted on it, actually. Said it was about protecting both of us, being modern and practical. Victoria's expression had shifted slightly. I'll need to see that document immediately. When couples marry and one spouse pushes hard for a prenup, it's often because they're already thinking about the divorce. Now, 4 months later, sitting in Victoria's office with rain streaking down the windows overlooking Elliott Bay, Trevor understood exactly what his attorney had meant. Before we continue with what Trevor discovered in that prenup, if you're smart enough to recognize manipulation when you see it, hit that subscribe button for Story Mode Folktales right now and turn on notifications. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're lessons in recognizing the games people play. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because I want to know if betrayal looks the same everywhere in the world. Now let's see what clause Simone forgot about. The prenuptial agreement that Trevor and Simone had signed 8.5 years ago was 37 pages long. It had been drafted by Simone's attorney, a detail Trevor hadn't thought much about at the time. He'd been so in love, so convinced that they were just being responsible adults, that he hadn't bothered to hire his own lawyer to review it. He'd just signed where Simone had pointed, trusting that the woman he was about to marry had both their best interests at heart. What a fool he'd been. Victoria had spent 2 weeks analyzing every line of that prenup with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. What she'd found was a masterclass in one-sided legal maneuvering. Nearly every clause favored Simone. The house they'd purchased together, despite Trevor contributing 75% of the down payment, would be split 50-50 in event of divorce. Trevor's Microsoft stock options, the ones he'd earned through his own labor, and skill would be considered marital property subject to division. His 401k, built up from years before they'd even met, would be partially hers. But then Victoria had found Clause 23, buried on page 28 under the innocuous heading Provisions for Marital Misconduct. The clause read, "In the event that either party engages in extramarital affairs, as evidenced by credible documentation including but not limited to photographic evidence, recorded communications, or witness testimony said, party shall forfeit all claims to spousal support, division of retirement accounts, and shall receive no more than 15% of jointly held assets, with the injured party retaining full ownership of the primary residence." Trevor had stared at those words, reading them 3 times before their full meaning sank in. She wrote this into the prenup? Her attorney did, Victoria confirmed. My guess is it was meant as a deterrent, or perhaps as protection in case you cheated on her. The language is clear and legally binding in Washington state, and you have documentation of her affair. Text messages from a burner phone, which constitute recorded communications under this clause. We'll need to authenticate them, possibly get phone records showing the numbers involved, maybe even testimony from the other man if he's cooperative. But Trevor, if we can prove this affair, everything changes. Instead of Simone walking away with half of everything, she gets 15% of joint assets and nothing else. Trevor had felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close. What does that actually mean in dollars? Victoria pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. Based on the financial disclosure you provided, here's the breakdown. The house current value approximately $820,000. You own it jointly. Under normal divorce proceedings, she'd get $410,000. Under Clause 23, she gets $123,000, which is 15% of the total value. Your Microsoft stock options, currently valued at roughly $340,000. Normally, she'd claim half. Under Clause 23, she gets 0 because those are technically your separate property, earned through your employment. Your 401k, sitting at about $287,000. Normally, she could claim a portion. Under Clause 23, she gets nothing. The numbers were staggering. Victoria continued, joint savings and checking, about $94,000 total. Under normal division, she'd get $47,000. Under Clause 23, she gets 15%, which is $1,400. The cars, your Tesla Model Y worth about $52,000. and her BMW X3 worth $41,000. Under normal division, you'd have to buy her out of half your car's value or sell it. Under Clause 23, you keep your car, she keeps hers, and since hers is worth less, that's just too bad for her. Trevor did the math in his head. Under normal divorce proceedings, Simone would walk away with close to $600,000 in cash and assets. Under Clause 23, she'd get maybe $180,000 total, and he'd retain the house, his retirement, his stocks, everything he'd actually earned. "There's something else," Victoria said, pulling out another document. "I had a forensic accountant review your financial records from the past 3 years. That $120,000 home equity line of credit you took out for her supposed marketing business? There's no business, no LLC registered in her name, no tax filings, no business bank account. She spent that money on personal expenses, designer clothes, jewelry, spa treatments, and interestingly, she's been making payments on a lease for a luxury condo in Bellevue, a one-bedroom at the Shores for $3,800 per month." Trevor's hands clenched into fists. "She's been keeping a separate apartment?" "For the past 14 months, according to the lease documents. I'm guessing it's where she's been meeting Kyle. The lease is in her name only, paid from a checking account you didn't know about, an account she opened using the business loan money." The betrayal kept getting deeper, layers upon layers of deception. "Can we get that money back?" "Possibly. The home equity line was taken under false pretenses, for a business that never existed. We can argue that constitutes fraud. At minimum, we can use it as leverage. Simone committed loan fraud, and if she wants to avoid potential criminal charges, she'll need to cooperate with repayment terms." Over the next 2 months, Victoria and her team built an airtight case. They obtained phone records proving the burner phone belonged to Simone, matched to her credit card purchase at a T-Mobile store. They tracked down Kyle Donovan, the personal trainer, who initially denied everything until Victoria's investigator showed him screenshots of his own Instagram posts geotagged at the Shores condo building at the same times Simone's car was photographed in the parking garage. Kyle had eventually provided a written statement, not because he wanted to help Trevor, but because Victoria had made it clear that he could be called to testify under oath, and perjury carried serious consequences. His statement confirmed an ongoing affair lasting 18 months, meetings at the Bellevue condo, and discussions about Simone leaving her marriage once the money situation was handled. They'd also discovered something else, something that made Trevor's blood run cold. Simone had been systematically transferring money from their joint accounts into her secret account. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $800 there, always just under $1,000 to avoid triggering any automatic alerts Trevor might have set up. Over 18 months, she'd siphoned off nearly $43,000. "This strengthens our case considerably," Victoria had explained. She wasn't just having an affair. She was financially preparing for the divorce, moving marital assets into her sole control. That's called dissipation of marital assets, and courts don't look kindly on it. Simone had filed for divorce in March, exactly as her text messages had indicated. Her petition claimed irreconcilable differences and requested a 50-50 split of all assets, plus spousal support of $4,000 per month for 5 years, given that her income had been substantially lower during the marriage, and she'd sacrificed her career to support her husband's advancement at Microsoft. The lies in that petition were breathtaking. Trevor hadn't asked her to sacrifice anything. She'd chosen to abandon her real estate career, had chosen to pursue a fake marketing business, had chosen to spend their money on maintaining a secret apartment for her affair. The first divorce hearing was scheduled for mid-May at the King County Courthouse in downtown Seattle. Trevor sat beside Victoria in the stark courtroom, his heart hammering against his ribs as Simone entered with her attorney, a slick-looking man in his 40s named Gregory Walsh, who wore a $3,000 suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Simone looked perfect, as always. Her hair was styled in loose waves. She wore a conservative navy dress that somehow managed to be both modest and expensive, diamond studs in her ears that Trevor had given her for their 5th anniversary. She didn't look at him. Not once. She sat down across the courtroom aisle and began whispering to Gregory, her expression a careful mask of wounded dignity. Judge Michelle Hartwell entered, a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen every variety of marital dispute and wasn't impressed by any of them. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up at both parties. "This is a petition for divorce filed by Simone Caldwell," Judge Hartwell began. "Mrs. Caldwell is requesting dissolution of marriage, equal division of assets, and spousal support. Mr. Caldwell, through his attorney, is contesting these terms based on a prenuptial agreement and allegations of marital misconduct. Is that correct?" Victoria stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We have substantial evidence of Mrs. Caldwell's extramarital affair and systematic financial deception. We're invoking Clause 23 of the prenuptial agreement, which specifically addresses forfeiture of assets in cases of proven infidelity." Gregory Walsh rose smoothly to his feet. "Your Honor, we dispute the validity of the so-called evidence and the applicability of Clause 23. The prenuptial agreement was signed under duress, and we'll be filing a motion to have it set aside entirely." "Under duress?" Judge Hartwell's eyebrows rose. "The agreement is 8.5 years old. Why are we just hearing about duress now?" Gregory cleared his throat. "Mrs. Caldwell was young, intimidated by Mr. Caldwell's superior earning potential and education level. She signed without fully understanding the implications." Trevor nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity. Simone had a bachelor's degree in business from the University of Washington. She'd been 27 years old when they married, not some naive teenager. And she'd been the one to insist on the prenup in the first place. Victoria clearly had the same thought. "Your Honor, Mrs. Caldwell was represented by her own attorney when she drafted and signed this prenuptial agreement. The attorney in question was Bernard Hoffman of Hoffman & Lowe, who specializes in family law and has 30 years of experience. Mrs. Caldwell can hardly claim she didn't understand a document that her own specialist attorney prepared for her." Judge Hartwell made a note. "We'll address the prenup's validity at a later hearing. For now, Mr. Walsh, what's your client's position on the infidelity allegations?" "Complete fabrication, Your Honor. Mr. Caldwell has manufactured evidence in an attempt to avoid his financial obligations to the marriage." Victoria opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Your Honor, I have phone records, witness statements, photographic evidence, and financial documents proving an ongoing affair lasting 18 months. I also have evidence of Mrs. Caldwell maintaining a secret residence, opening undisclosed bank accounts, and dissipating marital assets. We're prepared to present all of this at trial." The judge studied Victoria for a long moment, then turned to Gregory. "Mr. Walsh, I'm ordering both parties to engage in mandatory mediation before we proceed to trial. In the meantime, all marital assets are to remain frozen. Neither party may sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of jointly held property. We'll reconvene in 6 weeks for a status hearing." The gavel came down, and the first round was over. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Simone finally looked at Trevor. Her carefully constructed mask slipped for just a moment, and he saw something in her eyes. Fear. She knew he had evidence. She knew the prenup clause existed. And she was starting to realize that her perfect plan might not be so perfect after all. "Trevor," she said, approaching him while their attorneys spoke a few feet away. "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" Victoria shot him a warning look, but Trevor nodded. They walked to a quieter corner of the hallway, near a window overlooking 4th Avenue. "This doesn't have to be ugly," Simone said, her voice low. "We can work something out, can't we? I mean, We were married for 9 years. That has to count for something." "It did count for something," Trevor replied quietly. "It counted when I took out that home equity loan because I believed in your dream. It counted when I worked extra hours, so you could have the freedom to build your business. It counted every time I came home and tried to make our marriage work while you were at the shores with Kyle." Her face paled. "You know about the condo." "I know about everything, Simone. The burner phone, the secret bank account, the $43,000 you've been stealing from our joint accounts. All of it." "I wasn't stealing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "That money was just as much mine as yours." "Was the home equity loan just as much yours? Because last I checked, there's no marketing business. There never was. You committed loan fraud, Simone, and I have documentation of all of it." She grabbed his arm, desperation creeping into her expression. "Trevor, please, if you use that prenup clause, I'll have nothing. You'll destroy me financially." "The way you were planning to destroy me?" Trevor pulled his arm free gently. "I saw your texts, remember? Wait till I secure the money transfers, then I'm all yours." "You were positioning yourself to take everything while I was left with the debt from your fake business and half my retirement gone." Simone's eyes filled with tears, though Trevor couldn't tell if they were genuine or performative. "I made mistakes, I admit that. But I'm willing to be reasonable now. We can forget about spousal support. We can do a 60-40 split instead of 50-50, with you getting the larger share. Just please don't invoke that clause." Trevor looked at this woman he'd once loved, really looked at her, and felt nothing but a distant sadness. "You had 18 months to be reasonable, Simone. 18 months to come to me honestly, to tell me our marriage wasn't working, to suggest counseling or separation or anything other than lies and theft. You chose this path. Now you get to walk it. Subscribe to Story Mode Folktales right now if you believe in karma catching up to people. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? Let me know where you're from. The mediation sessions were brutal. Over 3 separate meetings at a neutral attorney's office in Bellevue, Simone and her lawyer tried every tactic to avoid the prenup clause. They offered deals, made threats, questioned the evidence, and even attempted to paint Trevor as an abusive husband, a claim so absurd that Victoria had immediately produced Trevor's spotless record, character references from colleagues and friends, and Simone's own social media posts from throughout their marriage showing a happy couple with zero indication of abuse or control. What finally broke the stalemate was Victoria's forensic accountant, a meticulous woman named Dr. Linda Patterson, who presented a detailed analysis of every dollar that had moved through Simone's secret accounts. Dr. Patterson had traced the money from the home equity loan, shown exactly how much had been spent on the Bellevue condo lease, how much had gone to luxury purchases, and how much had been transferred out of joint accounts without Trevor's knowledge. The total dissipation of marital assets by Mrs. Caldwell, Dr. Patterson stated calmly, amounts to $167,000 over the course of 18 months. This includes the fraudulently obtained home equity loan, unauthorized transfers from joint accounts, and personal expenditures disguised as business expenses. Gregory Walsh had tried to argue that the money was spent on legitimate purposes, but Dr. Patterson had receipts, literally. Nordstrom purchases totaling $23,000, regular payments to the Shore's luxury apartments, cash withdrawals that aligned perfectly with Kyle's Instagram posts of expensive dinners and weekend trips. The mediation ended without agreement, which meant they were headed to trial. The trial was scheduled for July, a full hearing before Judge Hartwell, where all evidence would be presented. Victoria had prepared Trevor extensively, running him through possible questions, helping him understand courtroom procedure, making sure he was ready for whatever Gregory Walsh might throw at him. The night before the trial, Trevor sat in his Ballard house, the one he was fighting to keep, and thought about the journey that had brought him here. 9 years ago, he'd stood at an altar and promised to love and cherish Simone Caldwell for the rest of his life. He'd meant those promises with everything in him. And for a while, maybe the first few years, she'd meant them too. But somewhere along the way, Simone had changed. Or maybe she'd always been this person, and Trevor had been too blind to see it. She'd become someone who viewed their marriage as a transaction, who'd calculated her exit strategy with the same precision she'd once used to close real estate deals. She'd lied, stolen, and betrayed him, all while sleeping beside him and pretending everything was fine. Trevor didn't hate her. That was the strange part. He just felt profoundly sad about the waste of it all, about the years they'd lost, about the people they might have been if she'd chosen honesty instead of deception. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Ready for tomorrow? We've got this." Trevor typed back, "Ready as I'll ever be." The King County Courthouse was packed on that July morning. Apparently word had spread about the case, the cheating wife, the prenup with the hidden clause, the potential financial devastation. There were even a few reporters in the back rows, though Judge Hartwell had banned cameras from the courtroom. Trevor wore his best suit, a charcoal gray Brooks Brothers he'd bought for job interviews years ago. He sat beside Victoria at the plaintiff's table, while across the aisle, Simone sat in a cream-colored dress that was clearly chosen to make her look innocent and sympathetic. Judge Hartwell entered promptly at 9 a.m., and the bailiff called the courtroom to order. "This is the matter of Caldwell versus Caldwell," the judge began. "We're here to determine the validity and applicability of a prenuptial agreement, specifically Clause 23, regarding marital misconduct, and to address allegations of infidelity and dissipation of assets. Mrs. Chen, you may present your opening statement." Victoria stood, commanding the room with quiet authority. "Your Honor, this case is about breach of trust on the most fundamental level. Simone Caldwell entered into marriage with Trevor Caldwell with a prenuptial agreement that she herself insisted upon. That agreement, drafted by her attorney, contained specific protections against infidelity. For 18 months, Mrs. Caldwell engaged in an extramarital affair while simultaneously planning and executing a scheme to maximize her financial gain in the divorce she was planning. She fraudulently obtained a home equity loan, maintained a secret residence, opened undisclosed bank accounts, and systematically transferred marital assets into her sole control. The evidence we will present is overwhelming and indisputable." Gregory Walsh stood for his opening statement. "Your Honor, this is a case of a vindictive husband trying to weaponize an unfair prenuptial agreement to punish his wife for a relationship that developed after their marriage had already deteriorated. Mrs. Caldwell admits to having a relationship with Mr. Donovan, but this occurred only after months of emotional neglect from her husband. The prenup was signed under questionable circumstances and will prove that it should be set aside in favor of equitable distribution." The first witness Victoria called was Dr. Linda Patterson, the forensic accountant. For 90 minutes, Dr. Patterson walked the court through every financial transaction, every hidden account, every unauthorized transfer. She presented bank statements, credit card records, lease agreements, and a detailed timeline that showed exactly when Simone had begun her systematic asset movement. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Patterson concluded, "Mrs. Caldwell engaged in deliberate and calculated dissipation of marital assets in anticipation of divorce. The pattern is unmistakable." Gregory cross-examined, trying to suggest that Simone had merely been managing household finances, but Dr. Patterson held firm. "Managing household finances doesn't require secret bank accounts, Mr. Walsh. It doesn't require transferring funds without your spouse's knowledge. These were not household expenses. These were strategic moves to position assets beyond Mr. Caldwell's reach." The next witness was Kyle Donovan, the personal trainer. Kyle looked uncomfortable on the stand, avoiding eye contact with both Trevor and Simone. Under Victoria's questioning, he admitted to the 18-month affair, confirmed meetings at the Shores condo, and acknowledged conversations with Simone about her divorce plans. "Did Mrs. Caldwell ever mention a prenuptial agreement?" Victoria asked. Kyle nodded. "She said there was one, but that her lawyer was finding ways around it. She said she just needed to be patient, make sure the finances were set up right, then she could file and we could be together." Did she specify what "set up right" meant? She mentioned getting money moved into accounts he didn't know about, making sure she had enough saved separately so that even if the prenup screwed her, she'd still have something. Gregory's cross-examination tried to paint Kyle as an unreliable witness, a man scorned now that Simone had ended their relationship. But the text messages, confirmed by phone records, backed up everything Kyle said. Trevor took the stand in the afternoon. Victoria guided him through his testimony, the discovery of the burner phone, his decision to document rather than confront, his hurt and betrayal at learning about the affair and the financial deception. "Did you know about the Bellevue condo?" Victoria asked. "No. I had no idea she was maintaining a second residence. I thought we were working toward our future together. I thought the home equity loan was going to help her build a business that would benefit both of us." "When did you realize there was no business?" "When the forensic accountant found no business registration, no tax filings, nothing. It was all a lie to get access to that money." Gregory's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to paint Trevor as controlling, as someone who didn't support his wife's independence, as a husband so focused on his career that he'd neglected his marriage. "Isn't it true, Mr. Caldwell, that you worked 60-hour weeks at Microsoft?" "Sometimes, during major project launches." "And isn't it true that you prioritized your career over time with your wife?" "I worked hard to provide for both of us, yes, but I never neglected Simone. I came home every night. We had date nights, we took vacations. I supported her real estate career, and then what I thought was her marketing business." "But you didn't support her emotionally, did you?" Trevor's jaw tightened. "I loved her. I tried every day to be a good husband. If she was unhappy, she had 1,000 opportunities to tell me. Instead, she chose to lie, steal, and cheat." When Simone took the stand, she was crying before Victoria even began her questions. She admitted to the affair, but claimed it had only started after their marriage had emotionally ended. She admitted to the secret condo, but said it was because she needed space to think. She admitted to the undisclosed accounts, but insisted she was just being prudent about her financial future. "Did you tell your husband about any of these arrangements?" Victoria asked. "No, but yes or no, Mrs. Caldwell?" "No." "Did you obtain a home equity loan of $120,000 by telling your husband it was for a marketing business?" "Yes, but I did intend to start a business." "Did you start that business?" Simone's tears flowed harder. "No." "Did you register an LLC, file any business taxes, open a business bank account?" "No, but where did the $120,000 go, Mrs. Caldwell?" I spent it on necessary expenses." "Like a luxury condo? Like designer clothes? Like funding an affair?" "That's not fair. Answer the question, please." Simone's attorney objected, but Judge Hartwell overruled. Simone whispered, "Yes, some of it went to those things." The final piece of evidence was the prenuptial agreement itself. Victoria called Bernard Hoffman, the attorney who'd drafted it for Simone 8 years ago. He testified that Simone had come to him specifically, requesting a prenup with strong protections, including the infidelity clause. "Did Mrs. Caldwell express any concerns about understanding the document?" Victoria asked. "None whatsoever. She was very clear about what she wanted. In fact, she was the one who insisted on Clause 23. She wanted protection in case her husband cheated on her." The irony was stunning, visible on every face in the courtroom. Simone had written her own downfall into the prenup, never imagining she'd be the one caught in its terms. After 3 days of testimony, Both sides presented closing arguments. Gregory made an emotional appeal about the unfairness of prenups, about how love shouldn't be reduced to contracts, about how Simone deserved compassion and equity, despite her mistakes. Victoria's closing was factual and devastating. She walked through every piece of evidence again: the timeline of deception, the financial fraud, the careful planning of Simone's betrayal. "Your Honor," Victoria concluded, "the prenuptial agreement is clear. Simone Caldwell engaged in exactly the kind of misconduct that Clause 23 was designed to address. She should receive exactly what the agreement specifies: 15% of joint assets, no spousal support, and no claim to Mr. Caldwell's separate property. Justice demands nothing less." Judge Hartwell took 2 weeks to issue her ruling. When the decision came, Trevor was at work, trying to focus on code review when Victoria called. "We won," she said simply. "Everything." The written judgment was 23 pages long. Judge Hartwell had found the prenuptial agreement completely valid, properly executed, and enforceable. She'd found clear and convincing evidence of Simone's extramarital affair, her fraudulent loan application, and her dissipation of marital assets. The final orders were exactly what Clause 23 specified. Simone would receive 15% of the house's value, $123,000, but not until Trevor refinanced to remove her name from the mortgage. She received 15% of their joint savings, $1,400. She kept her BMW, but had to pay Trevor $5,500 to equalize the value difference with his Tesla. She received no retirement assets, no stock options, no spousal support. Additionally, Judge Hartwell ordered that Simone repay the $43,000 she dissipated from joint accounts and split the fraudulently obtained $120,000 home equity loan debt, meaning she owed an additional $60,000. Total assets to Simone: approximately $142,100, minus her share of debt, leaving her with about $82,000 total. Total assets retained by Trevor: the house, his retirement accounts, his stock options, his savings. Approximately $1.1 million in total value. The clause Simone had written to protect herself from a cheating husband had destroyed her financially when she became the cheater. 3 months after the judgment, Trevor sat on the back deck of his Ballard house, now fully his, drinking coffee on a cool October morning. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Trevor, this is Simone. I know I have no right to contact you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved so much better. I hope you find happiness." Trevor stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "I hope you learn from this and become someone better. Good luck, Simone." He deleted her number and blocked it. That chapter of his life was closed. 6 months later, Trevor started dating again. He met a woman named Clarissa, a teacher at a local elementary school, who was kind and honest and had no interest in his money or his stock options. She just liked spending time with him, talking about books and hiking trails, and their mutual love of terrible science fiction movies. On their 5th date, Clarissa asked about his divorce, and Trevor told her the whole story. "That prenup clause saved you," she said. "It did. But you know what really saved me? Not reacting emotionally when I found that burner phone. Taking the time to document everything, to build a case, to protect myself legally before confronting her. That takes incredible self-control. It takes understanding that revenge isn't about hurting someone back. It's about holding them accountable while protecting yourself. If you found this story satisfying, make sure you're subscribed to Story Mode Folktales, because there are new stories like this every single day. Hit that like button and drop a comment about how you handle betrayal where you're from. And remember, sometimes the best protection is the contract someone else wrote, thinking they'd never be caught by it. The moral of Trevor's story wasn't complicated. Actions have consequences, and sometimes the traps we set for others end up catching us instead. Simone had created a prenup to protect herself from potential betrayal, never imagining she'd be the betrayer. She'd planned and schemed and positioned herself for what she thought would be a profitable divorce, but her own legal document had destroyed those plans. But beyond that, Trevor had learned something profound. When you discover betrayal, your response matters more than the betrayal itself. Emotional reactions feel satisfying in the moment, but rarely protect your interests long-term. Strategic thinking, documentation, and legal preparation are what actually save you when someone you trust tries to destroy you financially. Trevor Caldwell had been betrayed by his wife, had nearly lost everything to her schemes. But he'd protected himself through patience and preparation. He'd let the legal system work exactly as designed. And in the end, the clause that Simone had written became the clause that saved him. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about letting people face the consequences of their own choices, the consequences they themselves created when they thought they were being clever. And sometimes, the sweetest victory is just walking away with your dignity, your assets, and your future intact, while the person who betrayed you learns a very expensive lesson about karma.